Hello, welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in, sharing in this now moment with myself and with one another. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome back if you have. My intention is unity and oneness and the highest levels of love light. So I wanted to just go into a little flow with the guides and just invite everybody to just check in, drop into your bodies, notice how you're feeling. It's always good to just kind of ask ourselves that throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, so we don't get caught up in a lot of the other things that take us outside of our body, like our thinking, our constant thinking. And I have a lot of people I've been talking with that are worried. They're just constantly worrying about whatever it is that's going on in their lives. And we all do that from time to time. I'm no different. But the difference is that I've become more aware, and I think a lot of other people are too, when they are worrying, that we are starting to notice how that feels in our body. We might feel that our breath is fast and we're feeling out of breath or lightheaded. We might feel as if we are overthinking certain potential outcomes of what we're witnessing in the collective, or even what we think might be going on in our lives. And what the guides keep telling me and sharing with me, or my higher self keeps sharing with me as a reminder, is that if we can just get into our bodies, feel what we're feeling, those thoughts lose their potency. They don't become as potent. And I'm going to give a for instance. So if we are thinking about what if we, let's say, are having some crises in the world and we're going, well, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what about my kids? And what about our survival? That's the key word. I'm hearing that is a big part of what people are feeling right now is survival mode. And this only gets heightened the more we worry about it. And I know that is so redundant because, clearly people don't necessarily want to worry, but there are certain people that are addicted to it. It's a pattern, it's a frequency, it becomes a habit. And a pattern doesn't have to be a habit, they mean two separate things. But if we are in the habit pattern of doing the same things over and over again, having the same thoughts, releasing those hormones like cortisol in our body, it becomes an addictive patterning. It's a pattern that we become addicted to, that we look for. And we do it subconsciously and don't even realize we're doing it. And it can become such a habit that we end up looking for more of that. Because if we don't have something that's stirring up our cortisol or releasing adrenaline into our field, I'm hearing adrenaline junkies, we don't think everything's okay. We think something's wrong. We think because something isn't normal for us not to be stressed out. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind. And I speak from experience because I used to operate very much in my lower chakras and energy centers. I used to operate very much from a fear-based survival energy because of the way I was raised, because of the environment I grew up in, because of certain jobs that I had that were high intensity, or the people that I worked with that were high intensity. And I recognized at some point in my life that I actually fed off of that energy. And I got very good at it. I became very good at being in survival mode, in fight or flight. And it wasn't until I started doing this type of work and went through yoga, probably my yoga teacher training, that I actually felt the body, it became aware that I was never really relaxed, that I was actually always thinking. And it seems like we should know if we're always thinking. And I'm going to give a for instance. Have you ever gone throughout your day and you hear a song playing over and over again in your mind? Or you wake up in the morning and that song is playing in your head, and then later on in the afternoon it's playing in your head. And for whatever reason, you just ignore it. And then you realize, boy, this song has been playing in my head over and over again. Well, sometimes it's because we heard it on the radio yesterday and it's like stuck. It gets stuck like a sticky fingers here. And it just replays and replays. And then finally, that was my way of my guidance team getting my attention. So I'm bringing this into your awareness because it might be something that benefits you. My guidance team brings that into my awareness, and I realize I have this awful song stuck in my head. Well, number one, it could just be a synchronicity. It could be that the universe is trying to get me to pay attention to the lyrics in that song. But if it's not a synchronicity and there are no common themes with it, then why is it playing over and over in my head? And it's simply the fact that it's a pattern that I haven't picked up on. And it's a very good way for us to identify if we're playing these out over and over again. So for me, my guides get my attention with songs, as a for instance, and then I realize I've been playing this song. I don't even like this song. Why is it stuck in my head? So I immediately stop, become aware of it, and I always say, acknowledge it and recognize it. I acknowledge this something is playing in my head. I recognize what it is, or sometimes I don't know why, but I still recognize that it's there, and I shift it. I will say, I now stop all thoughts and music from playing in my field. Refresh. I hit the refresh button, and I do that with intention, and I do it energetically. And now I'm no longer have all these little floaters, we'll call them, that are unnoticed, that are not recognized, that are not acknowledged, that are just taking up space. And I can clear that and get back into a space where I'm not being distracted by all these little frequencies that are just there floating around in the field. So that is a good way for us. So it could be a thought pattern about ourselves. I've got to finish this. I've got to finish this. I've got to finish this. Okay, stop, clear, remove, regroup. Okay, I know I have to finish that. So I'm aware. I now cancel, clear, delete that thought from my field. Maybe it requires us writing it down and putting it on a piece of paper so we can pull it out of here and get it onto a material space that then allows us to essentially extract that from our field, make it known. So that way we can make room for different thoughts, make room for different energy. Sometimes it's good to acknowledge it, recognize it, and ask ourselves, because it could be a feeling. We could be having a thought about, maybe we have an upcoming meeting or presentation that we have to do, and we don't like, for whatever reason, our presentation, or we don't like the person that we have to team up with, or we don't want to have that family reunion. We're not looking forward to seeing that one particular family member that triggers us all the time. I could fill in the blanks, whatever it is that's potentially in your field that you realize comes up again and again. So now we're coming up onto this deadline, we're coming up onto this date, we're coming up onto this whatever it might be. And while we're trying to get our other things done, there's something nagging us in the back of our mind thinking, oh, I don't want to do this. Oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. I don't like this person. I don't feel good when I'm around this person. Well, in that case, it's important for us to recognize and acknowledge, A, we're having that thought recurring, and B, we're having that feeling that's associated with that thought. So sometimes they're not just empty particles floating around like a song that's been stuck in our head. Sometimes that song being stuck in our head is a way for us to get our attention and recognize that we're not really focused, or we're not really channeling all of our energy into, multitasking. We're actually channeling it into, or it's being channeled into other things that are not necessary for our attention. But in the sense of feeling, with back to the family member or job, it can be really helpful to say, oh, I don't feel good about this. I choose now to acknowledge that, and rather than cancel, clear, delete the feeling, dive into it. Why am I feeling this way? Could I feel differently about this? Is this just a habit pattern? Do I really feel this way about myself or this person? And explore it a little bit. Sometimes we don't need to explore it, though, and do the shadow work or do the parts and parcels or whatever work that is. Sometimes it's just about us acknowledging the feeling. And that's that thought that's been nagging at us. And we're like, wow, I feel kind of sad. Boom, we're in our bodies. We're not just separate from that. We become aware and we're able to then integrate that and feel maybe even better moving forward, or address that feeling before we move forward so that we can ask ourselves, what do I need in this moment to feel more secure in myself? Or to, what is it about this person that triggers me so much? Maybe it's my own insecurity or my own sense of needing to defend myself, or maybe it's because I feel fearful that they might do this, and that's another layer. Because if we're looking, we're avoiding something, or we are what's the right word? Essentially, if we are expecting something to be a certain way because it's always been that way in the past, that can be triggering our own feelings of insecurity and fear, when in actuality, it may not be that way anymore at all. And even if it is that way, what is it about that experience, person, place, or thing that's still triggering us? Why is it still triggering us? Do I need to allow that to trigger me anymore? Or how can I, rather than avoid being triggered, recognize that that's a thing and figure out in my own sensing, feeling, journaling, exercise, allowing that feeling to show itself to me so that I can see the deeper root of the issue? Or from that other perspective, maybe it's no longer an issue and it's an old habit pattern that's showing up for me again and again because it used to be something that I felt like I needed to defend myself. I felt like I needed to be afraid because I had to protect myself, because I had a sense of needing to survive. So I'd always be on the defense. I'm using these all as examples. We're really being called to recognize those coming up and recognize these old patterns so that we can sift through them, so that we can be aware and know thyself, and recognizing that it's okay to feel these. And I'm hearing feel the solution. And that's a play on words. So let's play with that just for a moment. So we're going to play with that a little bit. I hope my microphone's still working. I accidentally just push some buttons here. So explanation, interpretation of a dream. Oh, duh. Okay, I love this. So I'm on Edam Online. And what I had seen as I said solution is I was seeing dissolving of a substance in a liquid, transformation of matter to a liquid state. All right, so now I see what the guides. So essentially, we're looking for a solution, and many of us have been called to logically look for a solution by analyzing it, thinking about it, milling it over so it gets stuck somehow in here, or we have it associated with a memory, is what they're sharing as well. So what the guides are essentially showing us is if we can feel, and part of this is because we are, from my perspective, many of us are holding a different frequency than we were who knows how long ago, a couple months ago, a couple years ago, a couple weeks ago. We're constantly shifting and evolving, right? So rather than us figuring out a solution, this is a play on words, figuring out, I'm hearing figure it out, right? So rather than us figuring out a solution and saying, this is now going to be my solution, with the expectation of the situation or problem or person or place or thing being the same as it was, if everything's different now, then this particular problem or situation, whether it be family, friends, can even be what we're seeing in the collective, rather than expecting us to solve it from the same way, we are being invited to feel differently about the situation, to feel differently about ourselves moving into that situation. And I'm hearing allowing the drama to play out, and that's a play on words. So play out, like it's done. Let it finish, let it resolve itself, Everybody takes a bow, and now we start a new act. And we're going to decide how we want to move into that, the characters that we want to create, the character we want to be, our character. And moving forward, we're doing this based on a completely different dialogue, play on words, that we're having with ourselves. That's where it starts. So if we can, I'm being called to play with that word as well, and then we're going to go into this a little more deeply here. Okay. The basics are obviously dialogue, you're talking with somebody else, but you're also talking with yourself. So if you're having these thoughts out here, right? This is, oh boy, I'm being called to play with this. It's a log, right? Not like a tree log, but it's a log like where a captain's log, where you're essentially keeping track of memories, feelings. They can be thoughts that aren't even yours, and that's a whole other topic. But sometimes those thoughts can be because of a television show we watched, or there's somebody else's thoughts that are now kind of hanging out in our field because we watched the show, or we listened to a friend, or whatever it might be. And now that's kind of sprinkled in our awareness, right? So part of it is, what dialogue are we having with ourselves? That shifts what dialogue we're having with another person. Obviously, it shifts the energy around that dialogue. And when I'm hearing dialogue. So you're dialing into like a combination lock of how this is going to work for you. And this changes the pattern of that combination, and it shifts the frequency in which you are creating this record, right? The looping pattern, the looping record, and it reorganizes it in such a way energetically, quantumly, energetically, entanglement energetically, so that you can shift how that plays out. Back to reference the play. Now we're shifting how it plays out, and we have the power to respond, responsibility. We have the ability to respond with a more direct charge, rather than I'm seeing like, and when I say direct charge, that has to do with electricity and output signals. But instead of being controlled by these thoughts or stimuli that have been energetically disorganized, even though they held a pattern, they weren't organized to where they are we're only going to align with that thought if we match that frequency. So when we're aware of the thought, we're automatically shifting our awareness to recognize the thought. Then we can dissolve it. And I'm going to come back to that. So that we'll play with that. But dialogue also is related to across and between, to speak, to pick out words. So we're picking out things from our field of awareness, and we're then choosing what we want to dialogue with, what we want to discourse together, right? Oh, how funny. So I'm just looking to collect or gather, across or between. So we then change, right, how it is that we're collecting and gathering these things, or we're collecting and gathering these things and we're starting to say, I don't want to have that conversation anymore. That doesn't fulfill me. That doesn't raise my awareness, vibration, frequency, nor does it do that for the other person. So how can I shift and become aware? And by the way, what I'm being shown is to come back to solution and solvable, soluble solution, because it isn't necessarily by us doing it the same way we did before, right? We don't necessarily, I'm hearing a lot of people want to speak their truth, but it's based on old patterns. So is that true for me still? Is that true for this other person still? Am I assuming that this other person is the same way they were before? And am I going to respond the same way? We can still kind of play that out in our minds and our heads, but we're being called to do it with feeling and emotion. Feel our emotions around the topic. And this can come with family dynamics, relationship dynamics. Also, a lot of people are having differences in political views. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. And this polarity seems to be, pulling people in multiple directions. We don't have to have those conversations in some cases. We don't need to make our truth about that matter known in some cases based on, is that going to serve the highest and greatest good in this moment with this particular individual? And I'm going to give a for instance. Let's say we really have a strong political view. And I'm just using that as an example because I know in the US things are getting a little heated up again. And we are getting ready to have lunch with a friend that we know has the opposite political view. And let's just say that that's a common theme that we could kind of trigger each other with. And some people are choosing not to talk about it at all, and that's fine too. But let's say this is something that you're really passionate about. And it doesn't have to be about, it could be about a particular social belief structure or a particular program that's being implemented that we agree or disagree with. Whatever the subject or topic is, that's social, economic, political, whatever it kind of falls into. But really what's happening is your friend might be having a health crisis. They might have just gotten test results back showing that there's an imbalance. They might have a friend who's really sick right now. They might be in a position that they're losing their job or whatever it might be. And we're being called to feel into the appropriateness of some of these conversations and topics that we may be drawn to talking about. And so I'm sharing this because it becomes more of a recognition in that moment. Am I having this thought come up because I need to say it? Or am I having this thought come up because I just need to maybe put that on the back burner and feel into what would bring our friendship closer? How could we connect on a deeper level? What is it that maybe I can be of service in this type of interaction? How can I be of service? It might be the other way around. It might be that person can be of service to you and you're being called not to bring up certain things that would push them away. And I'm just using these as different examples, and I'm being very broad about this because it is a different way of interacting with our fellow humans. Also a different way of interacting with us. Okay. So I'm hearing problems and solutions will then pronounce themselves easier. Not with everything, but what I'm being shown is if we can be open to recognizing the solution may already be here, or there's no solution needed, it's just a matter of us shifting our perspective, and all of a sudden that problem no longer has the same energy factor, number one. And number two, I'm hearing fear factor. Number two, just by us shifting our perspective, the solution is us shifting our perspective. And therefore, the dialogue may not even need to be had. You may not need to have that dialogue with whoever it is that bothers you, with that boss, with that coworker, with your child, whatever it might be. In addition to that, maybe that dialogue doesn't even need to be had with you. You don't even have it with yourself. I don't need to tell myself over and over again that I'm not smart enough for that job, or I should never have applied because I'm just not good enough, or I should never have planned this family get together because they never understand me. Those are kinds of things for us to start recognizing. And when we can shift our perspective and change that a little bit, that dissolves. And what I'm being called to talk about, solution. So I'm hearing be the solution. So explanation, be the answer. Interpretation of a dream, I'm going to come back to that. The dissolving of a substance in a liquid, transformation of matter to a liquid state. So the way that my guides are showing me this is we become the solution. We become less rigid. It becomes less dense matter. It doesn't matter as much. It doesn't hold as much value, charge, frequency, whatever that disagreement might be, or fear, right? Or feeling of lack, insecurity, judgment, whatever it might be. And that transforms the matter to a liquid state. It becomes fluid. It becomes more movement, and that dissolves whatever is attached to those thought forms, feelings, emotions, triggers, etc., etc. Also, it says a loosening or unfastening, and to loosen, untie. So we are no longer tied to that belief about ourselves. We're no longer tied to those words that we've been telling ourselves. We're no longer tied to that particular outcome with a family member that we don't get along with, because we're not projecting that as a potential as strongly in our field. And two things, in doing that, it could potentially change the entire experience so that it doesn't even happen. All of a sudden, we have this family reunion and there are no issues because we dissolve them by us shifting our frequency and energy. We never responded to that person because we didn't hold the same charge when they brought up those subjects. It just didn't matter anymore because it was transformed. It's soluble. We can just integrate with it. We don't need to defend ourselves because it's no longer important and no longer matters. And by the way, this is not in speaking of, if someone's doing something hurtful, continuously shaming someone or making them, being, again, hurtful, mean, dishonest, all these things. Granted, that's different. That's not what I'm referring to. Sometimes it's not different. Sometimes it doesn't matter because that's up to them, and we can choose not to engage. We can choose not to engage with them or be in their field for whatever reason. But obviously, I'm speaking a much more broad focus here. So hopefully that was helpful for someone. I'm going to go into a little channeled message right now. Whew. That was kind of in flow, but it's a different kind of channeled message. So as we tie up loose ends, as we allow ourselves to solve the riddles that many of us have, I'm hearing riddle me this, riddle me that many people are riddled with. Many people will find themselves riddled with feelings of collective feelings of fear, anxiety, depression, etc., etc. But those are beginning to lose their sincerity. And we're going to play with this a little bit. Meaning, are we sincerely feeling this? Or have we allowed ourselves to fall into a complacency, so to speak, a constant giving constant awareness to this particular reality of scarcity, for instance, is a way of being complacent. We've agreed to stitch ourselves into that reality, sow ourselves into those realities. And I'm hearing reap what we sow, and I'm hearing sow a deer, female deer, talking about sound. And in recognizing that we hold more now, we have a capacity for holding more. We have a capacity to store more information or to access more information that is being stored inside our own abundant mode of transformation, our human body, our reality complex begins to shift, and we begin to move with such an extreme lucidity. Again, this goes back to the solution, which was interpretation of a dream. So we're waking up inside the dream and we interpret it from a different angle. As we do this, we shift our directional force, we shift our directional intent, and we move with the force. I'm hearing the Jedis, and we begin to master the frequency rather than being the puppets on a string, or feeling as if we are puppets on a string, or as if there are masters of our frequency. We begin to recognize we are the frequency. We are the holders of all strings in our own orchestration. They're showing me like, a string symphony. They're showing me string theory, right? And so we bring to the tables a new spin, if you will, and we begin to organize with a greater rate of reference. This is a play on words. Reference, reference. We begin to set the score and we interpret more, therefore, the ability to create more in an abundant stream of organization allows us to create more organization within the field of seeming chaos. We begin to work through that which seemed impenetrable before, that which seemed unable to be accessed, even though we stood at the threshold or knocking at the door time and time again. I'm hearing that song, keep on knocking, but you can't come in. Almost like we thought we couldn't enter, but now we see that that's all gone. Even though if we can change our thought patterns around it, if we can change our belief system around the structure that we've been, I'm hearing, incorporated into. And again, that's ink, calligraphy, incorporated into, corporeal, that our belief structure has been created around. We then begin to remap and reorganize how it is that we communicate with the map or greater structure of our organism, our organization. We begin to play our organs differently. I'm hearing the piper. I'm hearing we begin to clean out our pipes. We begin to speak with clarity rather than the miscommunication that sometimes we feel is predominant, play on words, in our field. We begin to say more words with better meaning. Meaning, we begin to say words that offer a higher vocabulary. And we do not mean the amount of words that are shared. It's the value of the words that are shared. We begin to share more that is more valuable for our colleagues, for our own human potential. But this must begin from within, and we must access the information that is stored inside of us, be our own bank, if you will. Use our own system that is full of access points, wealth, and stability. And so we must find this within ourselves before we can access the reality that reflects that back to us. And so this is a pattern that we are in the process of reworking, if you will. Some have access to this already. Some have access to a deeper centripetal force that allows them to reinforce their own, I'm hearing again, Jedi, oh, the Jed, raising of the Jedi energy tubules. So we are operating in reality structures in a very different way than we were before. While some may find it difficult to play in this way, for they are lost in their thoughts and therefore lost in translation of those thoughts, they are busy trying to think about how to translate that which they are seeing around them rather than coming home to their home base, their system that is within, that allows them to utilize this as information to disband from the old transcription, the old programming, the old thought distortions or patterns of distorted thoughts that were held within the framework of the human vocabulary that have created a funnel system, if you will, energetically, to funnel our energy to those components that were reaping benefits from our resources. So I'm being shown that we've given so much energy and so much time and material, it's materialized in form in the systems that we have, that we're abiding by today. But what I'm being shown is these little steps that we're taking are actually having a massive quantum ripple effect. And it's essentially slowing down the distortion. Even though it looks like it's ramping up, it's actually, I'm seeing us coming into a space where time is speeding up, but we're able to see in a more fluid way and operate within these time concordiums, is what I'm hearing. Concordance, concordiums, and this shifts how we're creating reality. So we're going to start to see certain things. Again, I'm hearing soluble. I talked about this in a previous video. It just dissolves. And I'm going to bring this up again because they're showing me that it's relevant. So it's like having I brought it up about the horror movies. So there's, my husband and I wanted to go to the movies, and we looked at the movies that were playing and were horrified. Ha ha ha, because they were all awful. I mean, entertaining, yes. One movie in particular looked really good if you want to be horrified. And I thought to myself, ew. Now, I used to love those kinds of movies. I grew up watching those movies as a kid because it's taboo. Oh, you can't watch that. It's rated this. And it makes people more interested. That's the whole game plan. And we have bought into that. We fed into that. And I'm not saying that's you watching this. You may never have liked horror movies. You might like sweet romances. But I'm going to use that as an example, for instance, also. But let's use the horror movies as an example. There's a whole movement that's their thing. And if that's their thing, that's their thing. We have freedom of choice to create openly, and we're not here to judge someone else because of what they want to create. But from my perspective, it doesn't make me feel good to watch that kind of movie. It makes the adrenaline and the cortisol go up so that you're giving that energy to that thought projection, which is being implemented and back to dialogued, it's logged into this earth plane existence in this reality. And by me spending money, spending attention, and spending time to that program, if I were to sign up for it, play on words, sign up, I go to that space with a collective of other people, and we give energy to that system. That continues to support that system, and that system begins to thrive. And in essence, we're addicted to the adrenaline, the cortisol. Now, when we do that over and over again, and we come back into when we're not watching a movie and we're living in our dream, our lucid dream, we look for more of that because it made us feel alive. It made us feel adrenaline. We felt pumped. We felt, that becomes a habit pattern. This goes back to what the guys were talking about in the beginning of the video. So if one day all of us said, I don't want to create that way, not all of us, let's say a majority, and by the way, this is a freedom of choice, and we said, that's not something I'm going to pay for. I'm not going to give my energy or the money that I work for to that type of project, that would eventually dissolve. It's not that it would go up in arms and they would say, well, it's not going to explode. This is what my guys were saying. But it just wouldn't be there anymore. Supply and demand, right? So there's a reason that if you go on the internet and you look at all the available movies, most of them are horror because they give that sense of rush, adrenaline, cortisol, addiction. It's a form of energetic addiction. So what happens is that would eventually dissolve, and we would start to see more projects that tended to lean away from that. This can also be, I was just shown another example. Well, I lost it. It gone. That was just one example, but we can apply that to other things. What other topics out there? Maybe the media, right? Are we addicted to? Are we giving our energy to? Are we giving our program to? There are a lot of other side shoots that are not mainstream that do offer these things. But because they're not mainstream, we aren't seeing them. And that is a direct reflection of the old energy trying as hard as possible to pull our attention, because the more where attention goes, energy flows and money goes as well. Money is value. So if we're saying, well, I want a new reality and I want to see beautiful things and I don't want to keep giving my money to this or that, we're being invited to ask ourselves, where are our thoughts going to? Where are we focusing our attention when we have a day off? What are we looking at in social media? What is it that's drawing us in that direction? And how often are we giving value to that particular thing, person, place, whatever it might be? Also, as we sit with that, if you're watching, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but it happens to me, like I was using that song as an example. It also happens with TV shows. I try not to watch too many things that are that jolting to the nervous system because it does stick. It sticks with me. And it sticks with a lot of other people too. They're just not recognizing it. So it's like this little floating whatever it is that's created this feeling of anger, fear, excitement. We attach to that picture that's being projected on the screen, whatever that is that we're watching or listening to. And then all of a sudden, we're triggered when we hear or when that, I'm being shown a map again, right? When that's activated again. So when that's activated again, that's constantly tripping us up. And we don't even realize it. It's happening throughout the day. It's happening with commercials. It's happening with our social media. So we are then, yeah, you guys get it. So we're just being called to go back to the message earlier to recognize those patterns. And so once we feel that thought, see that thought, feel the emotion that's attached to that, I can use movies or songs as an example because that's simple. Then we start to notice that where else am I doing this? If I'm thinking about this song over and over again and it's been looping around and I haven't noticed it, what other thoughts are looping around that I haven't paid attention to? And there's a lot sometimes for us. And that's part of that inner work. That's part of that inner dialogue. Let's have a conversation then in that case about it with myself and go, why am I thinking about this person? I didn't even realize they were floating around in the back of my mind. Could be that I need to give them a call and say hello. It could be that I need to maybe have a conversation with them that's uncomfortable that I've been putting off. Or it could be that I need to just clear that person from my field and reassess how I feel about that relationship, topic, conversation, whatever. And then once I do that, I cut that thought and I dissolve it, right? It becomes soluble and I'm able to see beyond that. It doesn't take up space. So that's the message for this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. And again, like and share these videos if you feel like you enjoyed it. These algorithms are kind of funny. I'm learning about this years later after starting this channel. So thank you so much for those of you who've watched these videos for as long as you have and you watched me kind of go through this whole process. I'm just very grateful for you guys joining in on this ride, right? We're all kind of, we'll talk about some transitions we've all gone through in the last 5 years. Holy moly. In love and light, guys. Namaste.